They called her a woman of God who never used the same Bible twice. Her name was Pastor Chioma Eze, and her church sat on the outskirts of Enugu city, built from donations that nobody remembered giving. She never demanded tithes. She never raised offerings. Yet she was known far and wide. People came from villages with crippled children, with barren wombs, with blind eyes. And they left different. But there was something strange about her, something so unsettling that people whispered it only in private, never aloud. Every Sunday, after the last worship song faded and the drums grew silent, Pastor Chioma would take the Bible she had used to preach. She would walk calmly outside, her white flowing gown brushing the red Enugu dust. Her face was always calm, almost too calm, like someone carrying a deep, heavy secret. She would kneel, open a small brown bottle of fuel, pour it over the holy pages, and light a match. The Bible would burn, its ashes scattering into the air like black birds. Nobody dared to ask why. Children clung to their mothers as the fire rose. Men folded their arms, shaking their heads slowly. Some whispered that the Bible was too holy to be touched after she used it. Others murmured that it was part of a sacred covenant, a mystery too divine to understand. An old woman once said, "As long as people are healed, who cares what she does with the book? Do not question what works." And so silence spread across the crowd. Nobody dared to challenge Pastor Chioma, for miracles followed her name. The first time people witnessed this strange ritual, they were shocked. But week after week, as blind eyes opened, twisted legs straightened, and wombs carried children again, the fear of questions disappeared. Instead, they clapped louder, shouted hallelujah, harder, and brought even more sick ones to her church. For when your burdens fall like stones into a river, do you ask where the current carries them? No one cared about the fire anymore. They cared only about their deliverance. And so the strange mystery of Pastor Chioma began. But it all started with one man, Okoro, a blind beggar who sat near Beat Market in Enugu. Everyone knew him. He had been blind since his teenage years, and many pastors had prayed for him without success. Some poured oil until he smelled like a kitchen. Others pressed his eyes until they swelled. Still, he sat daily, listening to traders shout prices, hearing coins drop, but never seeing the faces behind them. Until one day, a small boy named Chibuzo ran to him with a whisper that would change his life forever. Okoro sat on the rough pavement near Beat Market, his cane lying beside him, his worn cup waiting for coins. His world was filled with sound, never sight. The shouts of traders, the bleating of goats, the rustling of wrappers all painted his daily existence. On that hot afternoon, as the Enugu sun scorched zinc rooftops, a young boy named Chibuzo rushed toward him. Chibuzo was thin but fast, always running errands for traders. His small voice trembled with excitement as he knelt beside the blind man. "Papa Okoro, have you heard of Pastor Chioma?" he whispered. Okoro tilted his head, sighing. "Another one? My boy, I am tired of stories. I have sat here for years, and many so-called pastors promised me light. Yet I still sit in darkness." He shook his head sadly. "Some poured so much oil on me I smelled like akara. Others pressed my eyes until I thought they would burst. Nothing happened." His lips quivered as he continued, "Don't bring me false hope again." But Chibuzo's voice rose with urgency. "No, Papa, she is different. She never asks for money. She only prays, and people walk away healed." Okoro's blind eyes turned toward the sound of the boy's voice. "Child, I have been deceived too many times. Every miracle I heard about ended in my disappointment. My heart is weary." His hand trembled as he reached for his cane. But Chibuzo gripped his hand tightly, his small fingers strong with determination. "Just try, Papa. Please. I won't disturb you again if nothing happens." But they say when she prays, chains break. Problems vanish. Maybe your eyes too will open. The boy's tone was desperate, pleading like a child begging for bread. The blind man sighed heavily. Around him, market women screamed prices, children chased one another, and buses honked impatiently. Yet all he heard was Chibuzo's young voice, full of conviction. The sound touched him like water on parched ground. Slowly, his lips parted. "All right," he whispered. "Leave me there on Sunday. If nothing happens, you will not disturb me again." The boy jumped up, clapping his hands with joy. "Thank you, Papa. You will see. You will see." Hope flickered, faint but alive, in Okoro's heart for the first time in many years. That Sunday, Chibuzo led Okoro to Restoration Flame Chapel, a small, humble building on the outskirts of Enugu. The benches were wooden, the floor dusty, the walls cracked. Yet the atmosphere inside was heavy, almost alive. People sat silently, eyes fixed on Pastor Chioma. She spoke with calm authority, her voice steady as flowing water. In her hands was a faded Bible, its pages worn. She read softly, then closed it and lifted her eyes. "There is someone here who has never seen light. Today, light will find you." The whole congregation gasped. They all turned toward Okoro. Whispers filled the church as heads turned toward Okoro. Some people leaned forward eagerly, others doubted. Chibuzo's grip on the old man's arm tightened as he whispered, "She means you, Papa." Okoro's body trembled like dry leaves in the harmattan wind. Slowly, the boy guided him toward the altar, each step echoing in the tense silence. Pastor Chioma descended from the pulpit, her white gown sweeping the dusty floor. She looked into his blind eyes and said softly, "You have suffered too long." Okoro's lips shook as he replied, "Since I was a boy, I have seen nothing." Pastor Chioma's eyes narrowed with compassion, her voice steady as she lifted the faded Bible. She placed it gently against Okoro's closed eyes. "Father," she prayed, "let your light shine into this darkness. Break the chains that have bound him. Open what has been closed." The congregation held its breath. Not a drumbeat, not a clap, only silence. Women pressed their hands to their chests. Men bowed their heads. Children peeked between their mothers' wrappers. The air was heavy with expectation, as if the heavens themselves leaned down to watch what would unfold in that small chapel. Then suddenly, Okoro screamed. His body jerked violently. He grabbed the Bible pressed against his eyes and fell backward. His glasses flew off. His eyelids fluttered rapidly like wings fighting to break free. Tears spilled down his wrinkled cheeks. And then, with a gasp that shook the room, he shouted, "I can see! I can see!" The church erupted in chaos. Mothers fell to their knees, wailing in praise. Men shouted, "Hallelujah!" Children clapped and danced wildly. The sound rose like thunder inside the cracked walls. Okoro opened his eyes wide, blinking at the world he had not seen for decades. He saw the wooden benches, the rough floor, the pale walls. Then his gaze landed on Chibuzo, the boy who had never given up on him. Okoro staggered forward, tears blurring his new sight. He cupped the boy's face in trembling hands. "My son, I can see you," he sobbed. Chibuzo laughed and wept at once, hugging the old man tightly. "I told you, Papa. I told you you would see." The entire congregation danced, clapped, and rolled on the ground in joy. The miracle was undeniable. Okoro's blindness had vanished, and light had finally found him. But while the church roared in praise, Pastor Chioma slipped outside quietly. In her hands was the same faded Bible she had pressed to Okoro's eyes. Without hesitation, she knelt on the red soil, poured fuel across its pages, and struck a match. Flames devoured the holy book, curling the pages to ash. Some people noticed, whispering, "Why would she burn it?" An elderly woman murmured, "It must be too holy for ordinary hands." And with that, the fire consumed the truth. Nobody questioned further, for they were too busy rejoicing over Okoro's sight. But the mystery had just begun. Her name was Ruth Nwankwo, a young woman from Okpogo in Enugu. For 11 months, she carried a pregnancy that refused to end. Doctors were baffled, nurses confused, midwives powerless. For 4 weeks, she had been in constant labor, her cries echoing through her neighborhood like the wail of a wounded animal. Her husband, Daniel, had spent all he had, selling their land, borrowing from relatives, seeking help in hospitals and prayer houses. Nothing worked. Some neighbors whispered she was cursed, others said it was witchcraft. Daniel sat helplessly, watching his wife fade with each passing hour. One night, as Ruth screamed in unbearable pain, their neighbor, Mama Chica, stepped into the compound. She was an old woman with sharp eyes and a firm voice. "My son," she told Daniel, "carry her to Pastor Chioma. She healed Okoro the blind man. She will help your wife." Daniel shook his head bitterly. "Mama, I have carried her to many pastors. They promised miracles, shouted prayers, and still nothing. My wife is dying. I am tired of lies." But Mama Chica placed her hand firmly on his shoulder. "You have tried all. Try this too. What harm can it do?" Ruth's screams pierced the night like knives cutting through silence. Daniel rushed inside, kneeling beside her as tears ran down his face. Her lips were pale, her eyes swollen from pain. She gripped his hand weakly and whispered, "Help me." Daniel turned back to the doorway where Mama Chica stood. His voice cracked like dry wood. "We will go tomorrow. If there is any hope left, we will find it there." Mama Chica nodded solemnly. "God go with you." That night was endless. Ruth groaned and twisted, while Daniel held her hand, whispering prayers into the darkness. At dawn, neighbors helped carry Ruth, her body weak and trembling, wrapped in cloth. They placed her on a makeshift stretcher and began the journey to Restoration Flame Chapel. As they approached, Pastor Chioma stood waiting at the entrance, her gown flowing in the morning breeze. Her eyes were steady, her face calm, as though she had been expecting them. "Bring her in," she said softly. They laid Ruth gently on the church floor. Daniel knelt beside her, clutching her hand, tears streaming. "Please, Pastor, do not let her die. Please." His voice broke, raw with desperation. Pastor Chioma opened her worn Bible, her lips moving in steady prayer. She prayed in tongues, in silence, and in tears. Hours passed as the church filled with groans, whispers, and cries. Sweat drenched Ruth's face, her body shaking violently. Then, with a scream that split the air, blood poured onto the floor. For a moment the room froze. Then came the cry of a baby, loud, strong, alive. Before joy could settle, another cry followed. Twins, a boy and a girl, both healthy, both breathing. Women shouted, men wept, children danced. Ruth smiled faintly, whispering, "They are alive." The news of Ruth's miracle spread through Enugu like fire on dry grass. First Okoro the blind beggar, now Ruth who gave birth to twins after 11 months of torment. People could not stop talking. From Abani to Nsukka, from Aka to Abekaliki, whispers of Pastor Chioma's power filled markets and motor parks. Her chapel, once small and ordinary, now overflowed with people every Sunday. Some arrived before dawn just to find a seat. Others stood outside, pressing against the windows, eager to catch even a glimpse of her. The city had never seen such a woman. The lame were carried in on mats. Mad men were dragged in by their families. Barren women came weeping, their eyes swollen from years of childlessness. Poor laborers, rich merchants, politicians, widows, everyone came. And one by one, they left different. Some walked who had never walked. Some spoke who had been dumb for years. Broken marriages found healing. Poverty-stricken families testified of sudden blessings. The church walls shook with joy, and testimonies rose like thunder after a heavy rain. People said, "Surely this woman is chosen by God. Surely fire walks with her." And yet, one thing never changed. After every service, no matter how powerful the miracles, Pastor Chioma would take her Bible outside, kneel on the red earth, pour fuel across its pages, and strike a match. The flames rose high, consuming the book until it turned to ash. At first, people frowned. Some whispered in confusion, others murmured in fear. But over time, they grew used to it. The ritual became part of the miracle. Nobody questioned it anymore. To them, it was simply the way of Pastor Chioma, the woman of fire. The more miracles came, the more gifts poured into her life. She never asked for tithe or offering, yet people dropped money at her feet. A man healed from stroke gave her land. Another family donated cows. Some brought yams, rice, and goats. One wealthy merchant, cured from a deadly sickness, demolished the old chapel and built a new one, mighty and shining, with tiled floors, ceiling fans, and polished seats. Enugu people gasped when they saw it. "This is not a church," they said. "It is a palace." Pastor Chioma's name became a song on every tongue. Yet beneath the miracles and the gifts, the fire never stopped. Every Sunday, the Bible of the day went up in flames. Some believed it was to keep the holiness sealed. Others whispered it was a mystery too deep to understand. But nobody dared ask, for the miracles overshadowed the questions. To the people, results mattered more than explanations. And so they clapped, they danced, they testified, while the smoke of burning Bibles rose into the Enugu sky like an offering none dared to interpret. But the fire carried secrets darker than they knew. As the fame of Restoration Flame Chapel grew, so did the miracles. People from Lagos, Abuja, even across borders in Ghana and Cameroon, traveled to see Pastor Chioma. Newspapers carried her name, and radio stations called her the woman with fire in her hands. Politicians who once ignored her now sent emissaries for prayers. Every Sunday, the church overflowed beyond its walls, and the police had to control the crowd. But behind the music, testimonies, and dancing, there was something else. An attraction that began to stir in the hearts of those closest to the altar. Among them was Emeka, a young usher with sharp eyes and restless ambition. He had joined the church when it was still small, carrying chairs and sweeping the floors. Now, he wore a fine suit and walked proudly among the congregation, guiding worshippers to their seats. Yet, as he watched the baskets of money overflowing at the altar and saw wealthy men bowing before Pastor Chioma, A dark hunger grew in him. If only I could touch what she touches, he thought. If only I could taste the fire she carries, then I too would be powerful. One night, after the service had ended, Emeka lingered in the shadows of the new cathedral. The air still smelled of smoke from the burnt Bible. He saw the ashes lying there, black and fragile, glowing faintly under the moonlight. His chest tightened with desire. "This is where her power lies," he whispered. "This is the secret nobody else dares to touch." He stretched out his hand, trembling, and scooped a handful of the warm ash into his pocket. For a moment, he felt a thrill run through his body, as though fire itself had kissed his skin. The following Sunday, Emeka stood straighter than ever. He spoke boldly, moved swiftly, and his words carried strange weight. A woman in the crowd touched his hand by accident and later testified that her swollen leg had shrunk instantly. People began to notice. "That usher carries something too," they murmured. Emeka's pride swelled like a river after heavy rain. He started praying secretly for people after services, and some claimed they were healed. But each time he washed his hands, the ash left black stains on his palms that no soap could fully erase. Pastor Chioma soon noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The fire during her prayers flickered strangely, as if disturbed. At night, she dreamed of shadows rising from the ashes and creeping into her church. Her spirit grew restless, though she could not yet see the root. Meanwhile, Emeka's ambition deepened, feeding on whispers of power and glory. He thought himself hidden, but the fire he had stolen was alive, and fire never hides forever. The church that had risen on miracles was about to face its first taste of corruption, born not from outside, but from within. At first, Emeka's rise seemed harmless. People whispered that the fire of the woman of God had touched her usher, and many sought him secretly after service. They pressed money into his hands, begging for prayers, believing his touch carried healing. Some indeed felt relief. Others claimed their sickness disappeared. Emeka's pride swelled until his shadow felt too small for his own body. He walked through the crowd like a prince, head high, suit pressed, speaking with an authority that did not belong to him. To the ordinary eyes, it looked like the church had birthed another servant of God. But in the silence of midnight, the truth showed itself. Emeka would wake sweating, his palms burning as if coals were buried beneath his skin. The ashes in his pocket, once warm, now glowed red in the dark, whispering words he could not understand. Sometimes he heard voices chanting his name, urging him to ask for more. Sometimes shadows moved across his room though no lamp was lit. He tried to pray, but his tongue grew heavy, his words stuck. Fear gripped him, but greed held him tighter. Instead of running, he kept the ashes close. Meanwhile, strange things began happening in the church. A baby brought for dedication cried uncontrollably when Emeka touched him, screaming until he was removed. During offering time, the baskets shook as if pushed by an unseen hand. Once, while guiding worshippers, Emeka brushed against the communion table, and the chalice of wine spilled to the floor by itself. The elders exchanged worried glances. Pastor Chioma's spirit grew restless. Each time she prayed, she saw flickers of black fire swirling at the edges of her vision. She knew something unholy had entered her sanctuary, but not yet from where. One Sunday, as the service ended, a crippled woman approached Emeka secretly. She dropped a thick envelope of money into his hand and whispered, "Man of God, please heal me." Emeka's chest swelled. He touched her head, commanding healing in a loud voice. For a moment, She screamed and began to rise. The crowd gasped, but before she could stand fully, her body twisted violently, and she fell back, foaming at the mouth. Chaos erupted. Some shouted it was deliverance. Others screamed it was witchcraft. Emeka's palms burned so hot that day, he wrapped them in cloth, hiding the pain. That night, Pastor Chioma prayed for clarity, and a vision burst before her eyes. A hand scooping ashes from the ground, slipping them into a pocket. The fire roared angrily, consuming everything it touched. She woke up trembling, sweat pouring down her face. At last, she understood. The miracle fire she commanded had been touched by another. Someone close had stolen from the altar. The storm had begun, and unless she acted swiftly, the fire meant to heal would turn into a weapon of destruction. Somewhere in the shadows, Emeka's downfall had already started to right itself. The following Sunday, the church was filled as always, but the atmosphere was heavy, thick like harmattan dust. The choir sang with power, the drums thundered, yet something felt broken. Worshippers shifted uneasily in their seats, glancing toward the altar as if waiting for something strange to happen. Pastor Chioma stood firm, her hands lifted, her voice carrying through the hall, but her spirit could sense the disturbance like a sour note in a perfect melody. The fire that usually danced freely in her palms seemed to resist, flickering faintly as though warning her of an intruder. Emeka stood at his post, sharp in his black suit, smiling confidently as he directed newcomers. But inside, his hands were blistered, hidden beneath white gloves. The ashes he kept in a small leather pouch now whispered louder, calling him even in the middle of service. At times, he felt dizzy, as though invisible chains bound his chest. Yet pride silenced his fear. He told himself, "This is the price of power. Soon they will see I am more than an usher." He believed his secret was well guarded, but the fire he carried had begun to expose him. During the testimony session, a young man stood and claimed, "It was the usher who prayed for me, and my sickness left." Murmurs spread through the congregation, and all eyes turned to Emeka. He raised his chin proudly, but Pastor Chioma's heart sank. She saw the crowd's faith beginning to shift, not toward God, not even toward her, but toward an ambition burning in her own usher. That night, after service, she summoned her prayer warriors. Together they cried out for revelation, pounding the floor with their fists, asking the Holy Spirit to reveal the source of the strange fire. In the midnight prayer, the answer came like thunder. A vision opened before Pastor Chioma. She saw her church, but at its center was an altar blackened with ash. And there, kneeling by it, was Emeka, his hands covered in fire that bled into darkness. The flames rose higher, consuming worshippers one by one. She screamed in the vision, "Stop!" But the usher only laughed, holding the ashes tightly to his chest. When the vision faded, her body trembled. The Lord had spoken. The thief of fire was no outsider. It was one of her own. By dawn, Pastor Chioma made a decision. She would not expose Emeka before the congregation yet, for the scandal would tear the church apart. Instead, she called him quietly into her office after the morning service. He entered proudly, bowing slightly, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed his secret. She looked at him steadily, her voice calm but firm. "Emeka," she said, "there is something you carry that does not belong to you. Return it before it destroys you." For the first time, his smile faltered. The shadow had been named, and the battle was about to begin. What do you think will happen to Emeka? Will he confess and return the dark power to Pastor Chioma? or will he try to keep it? I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please share it with friends and family. Let me know your thoughts on Emeka's fate in the comments. Also, share what you learned from the tale. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to catch part 2 of this interesting story.